Hi, in this video we're going to have a look at how we can get very complicated shift calculations happening with a very simple timesheet object. So just to recap on what we've done so far, we've created an employee called Construction who has got a first aid allowance and a tool allowance that applies to his particular shift. So he's been listed as a carpenter and he should receive a tool allowance accordingly. So that's been done through employee tags. These are things that he gets every time. Then we've got some jobs set up, and one of the jobs that we set up was a multi-storey job in the residential building sector of the award. So they're two things that we've used to label that particular job. So let's just have a look now on this Friday. Let's say that Con worked for 8 hours at the Seaple Apartments. So we'll have a look at the kind of result we'd get. Sorry, not the Seaple Apartments, the store. So we're going to say that he started at 7 a.m. and he finished at 3:30 p.m. and he had a break from 12 to 12:30 in the afternoon for lunch. So that's as simple as entering a timesheet on behalf of an employee. What we would do here is now choose that he worked at the store. When I hit save and I go to show timesheet costs, it's to give you a pretty good understanding of just how quickly it's made that calculation. So if I hover over that, it's going to cost us $146. If I hover over that particular shift, you'll see it's being costed at, the first 24 hours has been banked as an RDO and the rest of the shift has been costed before and after the break at his base rate of pay, $13.62. Then when we get to the allowances, he's getting a fares and travel allowance, which is required under the award, 8 units of multi-storey, costed based on the award, 8 units of leading hand allowance, which was something that he'd been tagged with to say he's always the leading hand. Obviously wouldn't be the case in the case of an apprentice, but this is a fictitious example. Then we're getting some rates where we're getting nothing, and that's part of the RDO. Then we're getting 4.6 units of industry allowance, which is required under the award for all employees, 4.6 units of tool allowance. After the break, 3 units of industry allowance and 3 units of tool allowance again. And what you'll notice there is that it's a very complicated pay slip to work out if we had to do that manually. So just by a simple timesheet entry that any employee could handle, we've come up with a very complicated calculation here. Now, what would happen if I actually picked up a Saturday shift? So let's say on Saturday I worked from 7 and I only worked through to 12. I didn't have a break and I actually worked on the store again, just to catch up on bad weather or something like that. Click save, and I have a look at this shift. It's the same, except it's treating this shift now as overtime for the part of the shift that finished before 12 noon. So it's getting that particular rate of pay for the first 2 hours, and then a separate rate of pay for after 2 hours. So it's smart enough to pick up on that. And it's also going to pick up on things like working on a public holiday and all those sorts of things. So if the job's been set up appropriately, the employee's been tagged appropriately, you're going to have a very complicated collection of shifts being applied very simply. Now, what would happen if this employee worked in 2 different jobs on a day? Let's say on this Thursday, I worked from 7 to 12 on this location, which is the store, and then I'm going to go to actions, add another timesheet line, choose that Thursday shift, and on the second part of the day, from say 12:30 to 3:30, I actually worked on Quest Apartments. Actually, I don't have Quest Apartments enabled, but let's say it's just jobs. So what happens in this case is this would actually split this, even though it's treated as one shift for the purposes of evaluating what should get paid. For costing purposes, it's going to treat it as 2 separate shifts, and I'll show you that in a second. So we have one cost for the entire shift, but when it comes onto the payslip, that's going to be broken into 2 separate lines, and it means that when we run a journal or when we analyse our labour costs, we're getting a proper labour cost for each of those locations. So if I picked up, for example, an industry allowance in the second location, and that might be different to the first one, then that's what's going to flow through. So you're going to get really, really accurate job costing, and that'll make a bit more sense when we have a look at the pay slip a little bit later. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is work types. So work types are basically a description of the kind of shift that's being worked. And in this case, we don't have too much. We've got annual leave, we've got a distant work payment, we've got a public holiday not worked, and RDO. So there's not a real lot happening here for this particular employee. But this could be things like if we do time, or we serve time where there's been inclement weather, or in the case of distant work, I'll just show you that really quickly. Say we are travelling somewhere at a distance and we've got to put in a number of kilometres. So I might have travelled 150 kilometres away when I worked in Sydney. When I click on that cost, it's actually costing that based on the distant work payment based on the per kilometre rate. So there are a few different options there for using a work type. The other thing that we can do as well here is we can extend the context if we need to. It's not always something you have to do, but if we need to, we can go through and we can choose other shift conditions that apply to this particular work. So there are some things in here like multi-story and that sort of thing where it actually makes sense for us that those things apply to the job, not to a particular shift. But this might be used for things like if I performed a particular role on a job and that required a separate tool allowance or something like that. So I've got a restricted list here, but those are the kind of things that you can use shift conditions for. I was a laser safety officer for one particular shift, or I filled in as a first aid officer for one particular shift, that kind of thing. So it just gives us a little bit of extra context about what happened on that shift. Again, not something you always have to do. Okay, so I'm going to just, for the sake of the argument, say here that on this particular job I was working on a service call, and that was the best option for me. I'm going to go back and click apply. And then what should happen is I should see some sort of service core allowance flowing through to the shift that applies. So if we have a look at that, tool, industry, multi-story. It's probably reflected there as multi-story, but that's essentially the process you might go through to get extra context about a shift, which can be done by the employee or the supervisor. So if you need to know what shift conditions are applied, again, you just hover over this, and we can see what's been ticked, just like that. Okay, so that's the timesheet entry screen that you can use for the manager. We will separately look at timesheets as they apply to the employee, and in the construction sector we have a mobile phone app that works with this system, where they can go out on site and in real time capture these kind of details. So we'll have a look at that in a second. Thanks very much for watching this video.